Today's spoiler video is brought to you by Card Kingdom. Use the link below to pre-order your cards today. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Ravnica Legion spoilers, and we have a ton to talk about today, including some new mythics, some sweet rares, some lower rarity stuff, which means we should probably jump right into it. And before we do, a quick reminder, if you haven't already and you enjoyed the video, it would be amazing of you if you could take a second, click that subscribe button down at the bottom of your screen. It's a great way to support the channel and the site for free. So let's talk some daily Ravnica Allegiance spoilers, starting with our exclusive MTG Goldfish preview card. And if you want to hear more about this card, see some deck lists and stuff, there's an article on the site. I'll link it in the description box down below. We are talking about Angel of Grace. Our new mythic Angel in this card is super sweet. 5 mana, you get a 5/4 with flying and flash, which is already really reasonable stats, and it has 2 pretty relevant abilities. When it enters the battlefield until end of turn, damage that would reduce your life total to less than 1 reduces it to 1 instead, and then you can pay 6, exile it from your graveyard to put your life total up to 10. So my favorite part of this card, and I like this card for many reasons, but it's a super sweet callback to Angel's Grace, and it even has the name Angel of Grace. Like, the ability is very similar. So Angel of Grace, this card has a lot of potential in Standard, beyond the fact that it just has good stats on its own. In big flashing white flyers tend to do well in Standard because you can put them into play at the end of your opponent's turn, start attacking their stuff, dealing with their life total. There's even other reasons, though, to be excited for Angel of Grace. For one thing, we have a pretty solid Angel curve in Standard right now. Resplendent Angels and Shalais and Lyra Dawnbringers. Angel of Grace is right at home in an Angel archetype, benefiting from Lyra, giving us a huge flash threat to avoid sorcery speed removal. So if that's already exciting, it's a great way to pressure Planeswalkers. That's one of the biggest upsides of Angel of Grace compared to something like Lyra. Lyra, you play it on your main phase, your opponent can untap and Vivian read it, or to fairy tuck it. Angel of Grace, if you wait to your opponent's end step, you get to flash it in and immediately attack a Planeswalker if you want to. Attack a Vraska or Vivian read. You don't quite kill them, you do kill Teferi right away, which is awesome. It's a great Teferi sniping card, so that's a big upside as well. And then it's most at home, I think, probably in one of 2 archetypes. Outside of the Angel deck, it works incredibly well in control style decks where you want to leave up your mana for Settle the Wreckage and Absorb and Seal Away's removal and counter spells. And then if you don't need to remove something or counter something, you can flash in Angel of Grace and get a huge threat. Plus, its abilities are pretty relevant. Like, it's a way that you can stop a lethal Banefire at your face. Or if your opponent goes to attack you with a huge board of creatures, you flash in Angel of Grace, go to 1 instead of dead, and then you have a flyer that you can attack back with, maybe steal the game. Also worth mentioning the second ability, to exile it from your graveyard. You can just discard it to Chemister's Insight, mill it over with Surveil, but it's also relevant. Let's say you're playing Golgari, your opponent goes on this big massive attack, you flash in Angel of Grace, sure, you survive at 1 life, but you're probably dead the next turn if you don't have like a sweeper or something. Exiling Angel of Grace from your graveyard gives you a way to maybe survive another turn, give you another turn to find that sweeper or whatever. So both abilities are pretty relevant. So I'm pretty excited for Angel of Grace. The stats are good, the abilities are good, and very unique and interesting. So I will be super excited to see where Angel of Grace ends up in Standard. And like I said, if you want to hear more about Angel of Grace, make sure to follow the link down in the description over to the article. There's some deck lists, a big discussion about it. So again, thank you so much to Wizards for sending us a super sweet preview card. Yeah, it's a sweet one. Super excited for it. Next on our list, we have Unbreakable Formation, which is actually a kind of interesting card. So 3 mana instant. Creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. Addendum, if you cast it during your main phase, you put a +1/+1 counter on each of those creatures and they gain vigilance. So this is a weird Azorius card. When I think Azorius, I'm thinking control and counter spells and grindy removal. But this is kind of a different take on Azorius, and I think this card actually has some potential for Standard. So it's hard to find a perfect comparison for the addendum part. The best I could come up with was something like Abzan Ascendancy, 3 mana, counter on all your creatures at sorcery speed. Doesn't have the additional upsides. On the other hand, the instant speed aspect is similar to Make a Stand as a way to protect your team from Wrath. So where I see this card fitting pretty clearly is in like the mono white or Boros Weenie decks with Venerated Loxodon, Healer's Hawk, Adanto Vanguard. In those decks, this card does two really important things. First off, it gives you another way to grow your team, and if you're playing a bunch of Healer Hawks, you want to make them as big as possible. So 3 mana, put a counter on everything. That's already a reasonable card. Secondly, and maybe even more importantly, it gives you an answer to Kaya's Wrath, to Cleansing Nova, to sweepers that would kill your team, so you can't just main phase this, get in a huge hit with all your weenies, or you leave it up as protection for the Wrath that's going to ruin your day. So I think this card, while it's not going to show up in all decks, in specific decks, the white weenie style decks, Unbreakable Formation, at worst, a great sideboard option to deal with Wraths, and at best, thanks to Addendum pumping your team, it's probably even worse some main deck slots in those style of decks. So I think that that's where it fits. A little bit scary. I don't know if I want Boros Weenie and White Weenie to be even better, but this card feels right at home in those style of strategies. Next up, we have another mythic, and this one's a little bit weird. It's kind of been like floating around unofficially spoiled for a long time now. Seraph of the Scale. So 4 mana in the Orzhov colors. You get a 4/3 flying. You can pay a white, give it Vigilance, pay a black, give it Death Touch, and then it has Afterlife of 2. So when it dies, you get 2 1/1 white and black spirit creatures with flying. And this is kind of like a weird Lingering Souls-esque card. You get a big flyer at first, and then when it dies, you get the flashback of the Lingering Souls, essentially, and 2 flying spirits. Seraph of the Scales, though, there's 2 things that worry me about this card, and I think might make it more of like an angel card for Commander than a standard staple. So worry number 1 is, there's a lot of good flyers in the format, and Seraph of the Scales, I'm not sure it's better than Rekindling Phoenix, or Lyra Dawnbringer, or Doom Whisperer. Yes, the Death Touch is nice, you can kind of attack into a Doom Whisperer, but there's such good big flyers in the 4 and 5 mana slots that it might be the Seraph of the Scales is just not quite as good as the other options. The other thing is, some of our most heavily played removal spells in Standard right now, Exile rather than just kill the creature, Lava Coil, Vraska's Contempt, those are cards that almost every deck is going to have access to, especially with our crazy 10 Shockland mana base, which means the Afterlife effect isn't as guaranteed as you would like. You're going to have games where your opponent just Lava Coils your Seraph, it dies for 2 mana, you don't get the Afterlife, and that's what really makes the card good. When you are having this as a reasonable flyer, and then getting more flyers when it dies, it can be a very strong card, but the combination of not being quite as big or potentially as powerful as the other flyers we have in the format, and the Afterlife not being as guaranteed as you would like, thanks to Lava Coil and Vraska's Contempt, might mean that this is a fun Commander Angel, but not something that sees a ton of play in our Standard format. Although, much like Angel of Grays, it is worth mentioning that it does work in Angel Tribal. You can curve this into a Lyra, which is a nice upside, but you already got like Shalai in the 4-drop slot, Aurelia in the 4-drop slot, so even in Angel Tribal, there's a lot of competition for this slot, and it still might be that Seraph of the Scales just isn't quite good enough to beat out the other cards. Next on our list, we have some split cards, Thrash, Threat, and Warrant, Warden. So Thrash Threat is kind of an interesting card. The front half is pseudo removal. Well, it is removal, but slightly risky removal. And then the back half makes a big 4/4 beast with trample. And then Warrant Warden gives you, again, removal on the front half, putting a creature on top of its owner's library, and the back half gives you a Sair Angel, which is not a horrible deal. So to find a comparison for these cards, Thrash Threat is kind of like an Ambushcade on the front half, 2 mana, hybrid red and green, target creature you control does damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker. These are effects that sometimes show up in Standard. Gruul does have really big creatures. The fact that it's not fight, so you're not going to lose your creature, is an upside, although there's still downside. If you target your big creature and your opponent can blow it out by killing it in response, it kind of fizzles the whole thing, although being instant speed is a nice upside there. You can sneak it in while your opponent's tapped out. And then the back half, Threat, I mean, a 4/4 for 4 with trample, that's not a horrible deal. The beast creature type doesn't seem especially relevant for Standard, but a 4/4 for 4 is borderline playable anyway, so the flexibility is nice. Early game removal, late game big creature, and it's kind of the same setup for Warrant Warden. With Warrant, you get one mode of an Azorius Charm, although in all honesty, putting an attacking or blocking creature on top of its owner's library for 2 mana, that's a pretty good deal. That mode of Azorius Charm was used a lot while it was standard legal, and then the back half is literally a Seraph Angel token, except the creature type is Sphinx instead of Angel. So I think this card definitely has potential as well. It's the same exact paradigm we were talking about. Early game removal, and Warrant is solid early game removal, and then late game, you get a big body. Next up, we have Immolation Shaman, which, it's an interesting card. 2 mana, you get a 1/3, you can pay 5, pump it, give it menace. Has a bunch of abilities. Whenever opponent activates an ability on an artifact, creature, or land that isn't a mana ability, Immolating Shaman pings them for 1. So this is very similar to Harsh Mentor, which was a card people were really hyped about when it came out, and then it's just done pretty close to nothing. And every time I've ever cast Harsh Mentor, it has made me very sad, and I've wished it was something else. In Standard, there are a few things this hits on, like you ping off Treasure Map activations, Adanto Vanguard activations, Azur's Gateway activations, but really there aren't that many things that this hits. Although it is worth mentioning, if you just really want to beat like Lantern Control in Modern, you can't go full on like activated ability hate tribal with Immolating Shaman, Harsh Mentor, Runic Armasaur, Burning Tree Shaman. I don't know if you'll really beat anyone except for Lantern Control, but if you ever play Lantern Control with this deck, they're done for. They're absolutely done for. They can't ever win the game. So worth mentioning that there's a lot of redundancy with this effect now. It's just that the effect isn't traditionally that good in Standard or in Modern. So a cool card. Maybe there's something coming that will make it more relevant with a ton of activated abilities. But for now, I expect this to really not see any play. We also got Benthic Biomancer, which is our new Merfolk 1-drop, and I actually think this card is pretty good. 1 mana 1/1, you can pay 2 to adapt 1. So you can play it on turn 1, on turn 2 adapt, make it a 2/2. Also has an ability wherever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on it, you get to loot. Draw a card, discard a card. So this happens when you adapt, which is fine. The more exciting part about Benthic Biomancer to me is this might be the card that makes Merfolk playable. Merfolk have this +1/+1 counter theme with Kumana and Deeper Delete, Anada's Climb, so many different +1/+1 counter synergies. So with a Benthic Biomancer, even without adapting, you're probably looting close to every turn, and sometimes with like Deeper Delete, maybe multiple times each turn for free, which means you're getting rid of your useless lands and digging for your good cards. So I think it's possible that Benthic Biomancer is a really big deal for Merfolk. Also, worth mentioning, it is a wizard as well. I think it's less at home in a wizard deck, but maybe Adliz just needs another 1-drop. But wizards are much less on board with the +1/+1 counter theme compared to Merfolk. So I think this is a card to really harness its power. It's a great Merfolk 1-drop. Outside of that, I don't really know if it'll see much play. We also got Salamander Drake, a new 1 mana 1/1 flying, has adapt of 8 to become a 5/5, and the ability costs 1 less for each instant or sorcery in your graveyard, which means it can get pretty cheap pretty quickly. This is a card that seems almost assuredly to be in the mono blue tempo deck with Siren, Stormtamer, Merfolk, Trickster, Curious Obsession. Thanks to all the counters that deck plays, you can activate this pretty cheaply a lot of the time, maybe like 5 mana, 4 mana to make it into just a massive threat. So it seems like a really easy inclusion. It works as a 1/1 for 1 with flying with Curious Obsession, and then it gives you another like Tempest Djinn effect in the late game. Once you get a bunch of counters into your graveyard, it just becomes like the biggest flyer on the battlefield. So it seems like a really good inclusion there. Could also work in Spells Matter decks where you just try to get the adapt cost as low as possible and make it into a 5/5 flyer. I mean, maybe this is even something in the conversation for like Modern, where we see these Arclight Phoenix decks. They get a ton of spells in their graveyard super quick. If you can adapt 4 for 1 mana and make this a 5/5 on like turn 2 or turn 3, that's a legit threat, even in a format like Modern. Finally, we got Awaken the Erstwhile, which is one of the more unique cards we've seen from Ravnica Legions. 5 mana sorcery, each player discards all the cards in their hands and makes that many 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. So in one hand, you get this mass discard. Everyone's going to be empty-handed. If you have more cards than your opponent, you'll get more zombies than your opponent. I think this is kind of like a build-around card, though. Something people have mentioned is Treasure Hunt. Treasure Hunt, you can basically draw your entire deck, hit Awaken the Erstwhile, cast it, make a million zombies. The problem is 5 mana is a lot for a Treasure Hunt deck, and you're probably just better off playing Zombie Infestation. As far as Standard is concerned, it can work really well with recursive threats with things like Gutter Bones, Resemble Trembling Skeleton, maybe Desecrated Tomb can fit in the mix, where sure, you're both discarding your hand, but most of your stuff wants to be in the graveyard anyway, or comes back from the graveyard anyway. That's an easy way to break the symmetry. Also, Reanimation is worth mentioning. If you time this, where Eldest Reborn is about to get that Reanimation lore counter, you get a bunch of zombies, you also get a huge creature, so I think this is a really interesting build-around card. I'm not sure the best way to abuse it, but I wouldn't be surprised if someone can find a way to take advantage of Awaken the Erstwhile in Standard. Also, pretty sweet in Commander as well. Great zombie card in Commander, where zombies want their stuff in the graveyard anyway with a lot of zombie commanders, and then it's kind of free upside, and you get the tribal benefits of the creatures being zombies. Next on our list, we have a bunch of lower rarity stuff. Gyre Engineer is the kind of card that people love. 3 mana, 1/1, taps to add 2 mana. You see this card and you're like, oh, this card is going to be so powerful, it adds so much mana. It's reminiscent of like Palladium Mirror, Greenweaver Druid, Weaver of Currents, 3 drops that add multiple mana. The thing is, these cards always end up being worse than they look. They look like they will be good, or could be good, but then normally they don't see a lot of play, and I expect we'll see the same thing with Gyre Engineer, especially with our current format, where you got Judas and Fanatical Firebrands and Goblin Chain Whirlers, plenty of ways to kill a 1/1. So even though in the best case scenario, you're casting like a 6-drop, a Carnage Tyrant on turn number 4, which is great, the downside is it's a little bit less consistent when your ramp dies to removal, so it might just be that people stick with Gift of Paradises and Grow from the Ashes, and removal spells that don't die to creature removal, which is normally what happens with these type of cards, although it's definitely a fun and sweet card to have access to. Otherwise, we have a ton of random commons and uncommons. Burn Bright, Gruul Beastmaster, Savage Smash, Seraform Hybrid, they're all limited cards. I don't see much for constructed there. Galloping Lizarog is a pretty interesting card. It's big, you put a ton of counters on it from other things that have counters, so it can be massive in trampling, and maybe that's enough to have it show up in Standard, and it's definitely a spicy, fun card. Archway Angel, another good payoff for the Gate deck, although at 6 mana, hard to see it breaking into constructed. Bunch more limited stuff. Bankrupt in Blood is worth mentioning on its own. Having to sack 2 creatures is a high cost, but in the right deck, if you're playing recursive creatures, aftermath creatures, it might be doable, and drawing 3 for 2 mana is a great deal. Otherwise, we got some Guild Mages as well. Syndicate Guild Mage, Combine Guild Mage, and these cards, they're a little bit sad to me. We've seen both in Ravnica Allegiance and in Guilds of Ravnica, the Guild Mage cycle has been pretty powered down. In the past, the Guild Mages were at least close to being constructed playable, and some were constructed playable. With both sets in our Return to Ravnica, they're good limited cards. They're definitely solid and limited, but they're priced in a way where they just don't really have a chance in constructed. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Guilds of Ravnica spoilers for today. So let me know what you think about all these new cards. What do you think of Angel of Grace? How good will that card be in Standard? What can it break? Can it fit into Angel decks, Control decks? What do you want to fizzle with its triggered abilities? How about Unbreakable Formation? How scary does that make Mono White or Boros? Seraph of the Scales, can that Angel find its way into Standard? The new split cards, Awaken the Erstwhile, the lower rarity stuff. Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.